Well, hello everyone. My name is Tim Cavell, and my partner in this endeavor is Elizabeth Betsy Talbott. Dr. Talbott is at William and Mary,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I'm at the University of Arkansas. And if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to share my screen. And so the title of our presentation is Building and Maintaining Research Partnerships with Schools. And Betsy and I both have some experience doing this. I know that for a fact that some of the folks on this that are in our breakout room also have experience. So I think our aim today is to throw out some information out there and have a rich discussion as well. Betsy, do you have a preference for, you don't have any problem with people asking questions during our talk, do you?
No, not at all.
Okay, great.
And we will leave time at the end as well.
Yes.
So I'm going to start. As Tim mentioned, I'm Betsy Talbott. I'm a professor of education in the School of Education at William and Mary. I've only been there for a year. I spent over 20 years of my career at the University of Illinois at Chicago. So a lot of the examples that I'm going to give today are from that Chicago experience. I'm an educator. I've worked as a special education and a general education teacher in Virginia public schools years ago. So I do have that lens coming into this work. And I participated in the forum last year and met a lot of attendees who had experience working in schools, had a lot of interest in working in schools. So that's very exciting to Tim and I. And you're not alone. There are researchers across fields conducting work in schools. And this is a list of many of the folks from different professions who are engaged in research in the schools. It's quite broad, as you can tell, from the education side, the policy and leadership folks, from special and general ed, including learning sciences, all of the fields in psychology, pediatrics, as well as our friends in allied health. So everyone wants to be in the schools, and we're all part of, team science, as Andy pointed out this morning. So it is important for all of these different professionals from these various fields to be involved in working with children and youth. And we want to kind of ask ourselves why. Schools are healthy settings. Public schools in particular in the United States serve all children. They don't turn anyone away. And their age range from pre-K to 21. That's the exit stage for students with disabilities. So it really is the place to find kids. And similarly, schools are also the settings where all kinds of initiatives are launched, right? So anytime, legislators want to do things that are going to reach all kids, they go to the schools. That's just one example. So schools have a lot of pressure on them to do all these things and to reach all these children. So that's the sort of two sides of our work with kids in schools. And I think if there's one takeaway that I'd like you to have from this presentation is that school professionals can be partners in our research, and they can contribute quite a lot to the work that we do. And in fact, in order for our work, I think these days in particular, to happen in schools, we need to think about them as partners.
All right. So how to think about starting a school partnership in a new community? We begin with that because it's not as if you have a formal course in how to work with schools as a research partner. And I know as a faculty mentor, I've had former students take faculty jobs and they find themselves in a new community and they're trying to make inroads into the schools to create that partnership and conduct some research. And they oftentimes face a lot of questions. When they come into my lab, they came into a lab that had an established partnership with the school, but launching that partnership is not an easy thing to do. And there's a lot of potential pitfalls. So how to think about starting a school partnership? It's important to know the culture of schools. Schools really are kind of a culture all unto themselves. And it's important to appreciate the mission and the primary goals of public school or private school for that matter. And they're not built as a place to do research, but they provide a lot of opportunities for research, but that's not their mission. They are valuable community assets. And so there's a real desire to protect that asset. And so they tend to be conservative in the kinds of things that they allow to happen in the schools because they are focused on their mission of instruction and keeping children safe. And anything that threatens that is going to be a hard sell. Schools can often be a focus of local politics. Even being a school principal at an elementary level can be a fairly political job. If you've ever lived in a community where there's a discussion of changing school zoning districts, you can see right away how politicized it can be. Real estate values can be affected by which school district you're in. So people don't want their property values to drop, so they try to maintain this valuable community asset. Schools also have their own sort of language and lingo and jargon. They have a number of terms that they use, and oftentimes the people in these schools assume that others know them. And if you're a school psychologist, this is probably old news to you, but if you're not, terms like PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Support, or MTSS, Multi-Tiered Support Systems, or RTI, Response to Intervention. These are commonly used terms. Another phrase that might throw you is site-based administrator, which is another way to say that the principals at the school. So, or even the word student. Oftentimes that you want to use that generic student as opposed to child or adolescent. I know when in our writing up of research articles, we often tend to use terms like children or adolescents, whereas students tends to be the more commonly used term with schools. You want to know about the history, particularly if you're arriving into a community. What are the past experiences that the school or school district has had with researchers? Sometimes you learn about a kind of a scorch and burn history where someone's come in and taken advantage or not really played well with school personnel, and it's left a bad taste in their mouth. And you really don't want to move toward a school with a possible partnership, not knowing that history. So you're going to have to do your homework. It's also important to know about current events. We have a project that I'm involved with in state of Washington. And there was a number of economic issues facing that school district. There was a pending teacher strike. And all of this flavored the kind of interactions we had with school personnel and school administrators. So it's important to know about that. You could be walking into a community or a school district where they've just had a lot of complaints about some controversial curriculum, like sex education or, who knows. And if your research touches upon some of that, you could be in trouble yourself. You want to know the geography. Depending on where you move to, there may be multiple schools and school districts available. They could differ in terms of convenience for your research team. Some may be more flexible. Private schools, for example, have more latitude typically to make decisions and make them more quickly, but you may lose out on diversity if you go that route. And as Betsy was saying, if it's a partnership, you want to know the district's needs. How can you help them? It may be that you have a particular research question, the burning question, as Andy called it earlier, but is there a way to broaden that or link that burning question to things that really matter to the school district?
So we want to think about, as we start the school partnership, let's say in a new community, the relationship between schools and researchers, as Tim pointed out, the range of researchers that are already in the school, such as those individuals from the different fields that I pointed out earlier, and potentially how much overlap there might be with your research plans and those of other researchers, as well as, is the district burned out on research requests? And you sort of think, well, how am I going to get that information as a new person coming in? You can certainly talk to your colleagues in the colleges and schools of education at your universities, because they're the ones who are going to probably most likely have those close connections and can give you some advice about places to start out, and also perhaps provide introductions on your behalf. So that's a really, really good resource. I'll give a few examples as we move forward. My years at UIC, we had a principal preparation program. So those folks were, we prepared principals for Chicago Public Schools. So we had really good connections with Chicago Public Schools, and it's the third largest school district in the country. So there were some schools that were better to look to for research opportunities than were others. So getting that information is really critical. It's an interesting point that you can actually have some saturation across these individuals doing research, or sometimes school divisions with their initiatives that can affect the outcome of your study. So probably the best example I know of this occurred in Nashville. My colleagues at Vanderbilt in special education do a lot of research with the schools and a lot with academic interventions school-wide and in Title I schools, and that those Doug and Lynn Fuchs, big names in this work, and they do tremendous work that is really valuable to the schools, that when they leave, school professionals continue to use their intervention, reading intervention in particular, math, science, spelling, and so on. What they found was, over the period of a longitudinal study, was that students in the control group in their study were performing better than they expected, right? And they were really puzzled by this and troubled by this. Their intervention didn't look as good as it had in the past. And they dug deeper and did some research and found out that the Metro Nashville School District had launched this huge reading initiative, so that the control group suddenly looked like another intervention, right? And so that's, kind of an example of, on a bigger scale, things that can happen, but the extent to which you can find out what's going on that could affect the outcome of a randomized control trial, that would be beneficial to you. One of the things that, and some examples I'll give coming up, have to do with partnerships in underrepresented communities. So I talked about Chicago Public Schools being a big resource for those of us doing research who had done research in Chicago. There are some urban communities in the Chicagoland area, for example, big metropolitan area, that are urban, even though they're outside Chicago, meaning they're diverse. Some of them are dealing with issues, economic issues among their students and families. And so there might be opportunities to work with the school district that is less often recruited, and can be a great opportunity for you. I can think of one in particular that is in the south suburbs of Chicago that we've had a nice long relationship with and has been a very fruitful partnership. Similarly, when we look at demographic characteristics of schools in the Chicagoland area in particular, we can go outside near O'Hare Airport and find tremendous diversity in the population of students who go to school there. So there's a lot of opportunities depending on where you are. If you're in a college town, those schools get burned out quickly because everybody wants to do their dissertation in this particular college town. So the extent to which you can branch out will only help you. I'm new at William & Mary, and there's a lot of rural school districts near Williamsburg, and they're eager to engage in research partnerships. They're harder to get to geographically. There's a lot of water where we are, so you have to kind of go around the peninsula, but those can be really fruitful partnerships. They're challenging in the case of the rural schools because we have, like, some of the districts will have one elementary, one middle, one high school. Might not give you the number of participants you need, but it can be a great opportunity. And again, think throughout the process, and I'll give some examples in a minute of what you can contribute. What's your expertise? What can you give to the schools? And I would argue quite a lot.
Implicit in what Betsy was saying here and in this list of items is that you might arrive on the scene and there are already established partnerships. And if it's the case, like most of these partnerships, there are relationships. There is a connection between the school personnel and the researcher. And sometimes that may even be a strong allegiance. So for you to knock on the door of the school or the district administrator could threaten the sense of allegiance to the researcher that's already established that partnership. And so you really want to be sensitive to that possibility. You don't want to go in and step on toes because that could be perceived as a misstep.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So beginning steps, who to contact first. So one category of folks to contact first are decision makers, those who have the authority to greenlight a project or stop a project. And one of the best things to do early on is to learn the organizational chart. You know, who's the superintendent? How long has that person been in place? What's their reputation, their history? What seemed to be the emphasis of their role as superintendent? How are they viewed? What's the Board of Education like politically? You know, how has it been viewed? Has there been a lot of controversy? Oftentimes, the person in the district who vets research project is not always labeled as the research director or the research approver. It's often embedded in an office that looks a lot like this: assessment and accountability. Research may be part of the term, but not always. And so you have to ask around to find out who that person is. And if you can establish a connection with that person, that's always pretty valuable, because they can guide you and they can help you avoid missteps. Some districts have a research review committee. It's not a single person, and you have to submit your protocol through the research review committee. And there may be an IRB committee in that school district in addition to the one at your own institution. And then there are, if you know anything about schools, you know that the principal sets the tone for the culture at that school. And so you really want to have some knowledge about the potential schools and school principals with whom you're working.
And there are going to be gatekeepers, right? People who can help you get access to these different individuals that Tim has listed on the previous slide. And this is kind of, you know, often a word of mouth opportunity to find out who are the gatekeepers, who are the people that I can contact. And this is where, you know, talking with your colleagues in the College of Education at your university can be really helpful. You want people who have a good reputation with the school district. Tim mentioned the political aspect of working in schools. This person or this school or this principal could have had a really bad experience with research in the past from people at your university, even though it's another department and they don't want to have anything to do with your university. So it's really helpful to have that information on the front end. You don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste their time. So you want to come in knowledgeable. Sometimes people in your neighborhood might give you good advice about whom to approach in working for the district. I've had a lot of success with my own professional relationships as being a point of contact for getting into schools. I've had personally less success as a parent when of children going through the schools and finding access that way, interestingly enough. So for me, and this won't necessarily be the same for all of you, but I have done some work with some special education research directors or special education directors in the school district, and they've been able to help me get into schools throughout the state of Illinois and in Virginia. So you want to look for those people who have those connections. And if you're new to a particular college or university, looking for colleagues who have had those long and successful partnerships with the school. So if you're going to Arkansas, you want to talk to Tim, right? He's going to help your entree there. And the principals are incredibly valuable contacts. So they can get you in. Absolutely. So again, you want to, at the same time, you want to find sort of the good gatekeepers. You want to avoid the individuals who might have a negative reputation. Maybe maybe it's a neighbor who happens to know someone on the school board. School boards are highly political in our country. And again, I refer to my experience as a parent of kids going through school. And there's been a lot of politics among members of our school board. They hire and fire superintendents. They have a lot of power. And so it's important to know, the politics coming in. Sometimes you can actually make connections with individual teachers, but you want it to be the right kind of connection. So if it's your child's teacher or teacher who hopes that, wow, you're doing this research, maybe that can correct what's wrong with the school, it's probably not a good idea to go in with that sort of agenda. If you're going to have connections with research colleagues to help you get into the schools, make sure it's somebody who's active and kind of knows the current context and has been successful and has those relationships. Not somebody who maybe went, in and out 10 years ago and knows a little bit about the school or whatever, but people who are really know the current players. Those are going to be your best gatekeepers. And for me, as I said, it was these special ed administrators, but it can be all sorts of different people.
So how to make initial contact. Okay. So I want to provide you a bit of a frame as you think about this. So what I have three kids, and my youngest is a boy. When he was very young, and we would offer him some options of things to eat or things to do, his language skills were such where instead of saying it doesn't matter, he would say I don't matter, which we thought was just precious and cute. But it's a good mantra to keep in mind when you think about approaching schools. You really don't matter to them. Okay. I know that's overstated, and unless you come in with some amazing curriculum that's going to bolster their performance academically, you may not matter a whole lot to them. Okay. And you certainly don't want to be on the other side of that where you matter to them in a negative way. And so it's a lot like trying to sell phone books. When's the last time you ever bought a phone book? Whoever bought the first thing you do with a phone book is you give it away, you put it in the recycling bin, right? So it's not unlike that. And so you want to be fully behind the school's mission. These are useful frames. I don't want to be a bother. I don't really matter to you. You've got 100 things to do. I'm nowhere on your radar. I recognize that. I realize I'm selling phone books, but I want to be in line with your mission. Okay. I know that sounds rather drastic to put it that way, but I'm trying to make a hard pitch using Andy's term for not coming in as the savior, or just because you're Dr. So-and-so with your long record of publications that they're going to open their doors for you. Do not expect that. Okay. A phone call, I have found, and I'm curious as to what others have experienced, is often a good way to begin. You want to be careful about using title. It's not always clear on websites whether someone in the school district position has their doctoral degree. I think if you don't know, probably best to use it or ask someone. If you're talking with the administrative assistant and who's putting you through, you can ask for the title. If you do have your doctorate, I would encourage you to say, this is Dr. So-and-so, especially for that very first phone call. I know it sounds a bit, I don't know what you would think about that, but you don't want, that's one of the occasions where you want to use the term doctorate to your benefit. And let's say it's Dr. Smith you're talking to. If he or she happens to be in, you do not want to overload or overwhelm Dr. Smith. You want a simple opportunity to say, hi, I'd love a chance to meet with you sometime to talk about the fact that I do research in the schools. You don't want to linger. You don't want to overstay your welcome. So the basic ask here is, how can I arrange an opportunity to meet? So that could be, again, it's whatever interaction you have, it's going to be an elevator type pitch. So you may have to schedule an elevator type pitch, so recognize that. So you want to be very deferential and accommodating. I've done drop-in visits where I've been asked if I could leave a one-pager. I may have been a follow-up to a phone call that wasn't successful, never got a return call. Sometimes you can hand deliver it to the person, to Dr. Smith. Again, be very brief and very agreeable. Emails can be useful when you're trying to learn the proper channel of command about who should I contact. You want to use very short, very straightforward, simple emails. It's always useful, I find, to have one simple question, maybe two, but usually one. You want to highlight it. That's where their eyes are going to go. They're very busy, particularly if you're dealing with the site-based administrators at school, but even other administrators, they're putting out fires. And so if you're pulling them from a fire, they're not going to have a lot of time. You know, something's blown up, some personnel issue, some student issue, what have you. So you want to give them something they can focus on rather quickly and give a simple answer to. Who should I contact? Is there a time tomorrow when we can chat? Is it okay if I drop off this one pager? Very straightforward, simple requests that can be easily accommodated. So you're not necessarily bringing flowers at that point, but you're bringing your smile and your brevity and your deferential attitude. Some districts have a research submission portal, and it can be somewhat like a grant submission process where you want to know that they're not putting out requests for proposals necessarily, but they may have a sense of of the kind of proposals that will go through their system and those that are non-starters. So it's helpful to try to speak with the review committee chair about that. There may be very specific constraints, priorities. They may, for example, never let a researcher anywhere near their instructional time periods. And instead, they may say, well, you can, it would be okay if you're in the elementary schools to pull kids out of specials. And I don't know if you know that term, but that's a term used to describe the non-core academic subjects of like art, music, PE. It's good to ask the review committee chair things to avoid, maybe what sort of mistakes have people made in the past that I don't want to repeat. What are the things that are helpful to do? Are they willing to look over your submission? That would be a great advantage if they agree to that. And you want to clarify that you're going to get I or B approval, but you want to know whether that should be done before you contact the school and request, or should it be after the fact? So the initial meeting, when you actually have an opportunity to sit down or have an extended phone conversation with someone, we have one chance to make a first impression, is the expression, right? And so I think of this sort of like in the movie industry, the meet cute. That's the term that's used to describe this, the kind of funny, unique ways in which usually it's a romantic couple first meet. And so here are some of the types of first meetings that might happen for school researchers. And this is a Hollywood playwright came up with this typology. There's the neutral, nervous, cute meet, where schools are indifferent at best, and you're unsure of how to get it in the door. Now I want to show you this clip. So that sometimes is how it is. You're sort of fumbling your way through these meetings, trying to understand what it is that's going to make it attractive for a school to want to work with you. And I'm reminded of a project that one of my students who's actually in this meeting led, where we're trying to work with high schools to do a study of adolescent dating violence. And this was new for us. Most of our research is with the elementary school kids, not with high schoolers. And so we made a lot more missteps. We were a lot more unsure of ourselves because it was less familiar territory. And schools very much were at times indifferent, and sometimes even less than indifferent, more not open to what we wanted to do. So some schools looked like that guy walking into that restaurant, and we could only just stare. Okay. That's the neutral, nervous, meet cute. Then there's the push pull, which is where schools have some interest and you're very much interested. Okay. And we have an IES grant project that we did in Olympia, and we got notice of the award, and we were letting the school district know, that our contact, about the award. This is after we had gotten the funding, and the person who was our point of contact suddenly started waffling on, well, I'm not sure if this is such a good idea. I mean, there's a long time lag between a district writing a letter of support and you finally getting the word about your funding. So enough time had passed to where, and it's not as if you're staying in regular routine contact with that school district, but by the time we circled back and said, now we have funding, this person was less enamored of the whole idea, had some doubts, was concerned about the logistics. And this is a grant of over $1 million. And it was one of the more nervous, anxiety-provoking professional interactions I've ever had, because I thought she was going to basically pull the plug on our project at that point. And fortunately, she did not, and it's been a great working relationship. But I was pulling hard, and she was pushing back a little bit. And then there's the pull, where both you and the schools want a partnership. And I'm going to turn it over to Betsy. I have less experience with these kind of meet cutes, if as I call them. but Betsy has some.
Yes, and one project in particular that I was on with Mark Atkins, also at UIC. He's a psychology professor in a department of psychiatry, and he and I arrived at UIC at the same time and had a nice partnership because he wanted to do research in schools. And one of the NIMH project that we had involved bringing professionals from the mental health community, from the community agencies, into the schools to work with teachers. So he had the connection to the mental health community, and we both had the connection to the school. So he was really bringing something into the schools. These were people in the community who were serving the same kids as the kids attending the school. So we were sort of matchmakers to some degree in getting these professionals from the different agencies together to improve the quality of interventions for kids with ADHD in this particular project, work that kind of continues into work that Andy and I are doing today, which is connecting school professionals with pediatric healthcare professionals to improve the care and education of kids with ADHD. So it's great when you have those opportunities. It's like, I'm a researcher from this university, but I can help solve this problem that you have, or this challenge that you have, which is improving the quality of mental health care and kids' access to mental health care, right? We know that's a huge issue in urban communities in particular. So how can I, help, in this case, be the matchmaker to give you something that you want, and then I can get something that I want, which is to collect data and test out the effectiveness of this intervention. On the topic of IES, the Institute of Education Sciences, I put a link to their grant funding page in the chat box. I don't know the extent to which you all are familiar with IES, but they have two centers. One is the National Center for Education Research, and the other is the National Center for Special Ed Research. And so they fund research that is particular to kids in schools that has an educational, broadly defined benefit to kids. So this might be a really good resource for you. You should certainly check it out. The RFAs just came out, and so you can consider submitting a grant to IES this summer, if you're so inclined. They do require, as Tim was saying, letters of support from school partners. And this is a challenge, right? Because you're saying, I'm writing this grant, can you write me a letter? And it may not get funded. And guess what? I might be coming back to you next year when I resubmit the grant and want the same letter. So that can be a challenge in the course of the partnership. They're not committing to anything by providing that letter. So that's one thing. And you draft the letter for them, that they then put on their letterhead. So you're not asking a lot of them to do this, but this is part of the partnership. And like year after year, you come back and say, I'm revising this grant. Or sometimes IES will say, we want, a colleague of mine had this experience. He had like 75 kids in different schools, and they wanted letters from every single one of those schools. It was kind of crazy because it was like maybe one kid per school, a small number. So those are things to think about. IES is a really great resource, and they do fund excellent research that those of you who are interested in mental health and mental health interventions might want to check out.
Betsy, can I make a comment about IES? One is that there is a one submission deadline. It's once a year. Used to be twice, now it's once. And to the best of my knowledge, I've looked, and there is not the IES equivalent of an NRSA. So it's not as readily available for graduate student research funding as is the case with NIH.
Mm-hmm. True.
That sound accurate?
Yep.
Okay.
So we want to think about what's most important to know about how this district views research partnerships, and what are next steps and what are key things to avoid. As my little speech about getting letters of support indicates, it really is a long game that you're playing. It's a long-term investment in whatever schools you're able to connect with. And so you all really do bring the potential for great resources to the table, especially now in the combined COVID-19 crisis, socioeconomic crisis, highlighting racial injustice, and the digital divide that was so openly exposed in our schools this past spring. You, as clinical people, clinical mental health experts, have a lot you can provide to schools, especially in the area, I would argue, of trauma-informed care. So resources that you can gather, that wouldn't be their area of expertise, right? They might have one school psychologist, they might have a couple school counselors or social workers, but they need access to those evidence-based resources that you could provide, through a website or whatever school-friendly resources that you can provide. And I have some examples at the end of the PowerPoint. So you can really come in with, look, here's something that I can provide for you. And you guys are teaching reading and math and writing and science and social studies. You're not thinking, you don't know what trauma-informed care is. The school personnel don't, but you all do. And so that's a huge resource that you can provide. And in fact, that I found that they're asking for. So just to throw that out there as part of the initial ask, look, there's something I can give you right off the bat, and I'm very happy to do so. And Tim, you have an example from your dating violence research?
Yes. So this was a study I alluded to earlier. And our initial entree, and it almost worked, but we hit a couple of snags, was we wanted to do a study looking at adolescent dating violence, and we looked at the state regulations about education in high school health classes, and there was a requirement that they look at healthy relationships, and so we saw a possible synergistic door to go through, and contacted someone who was a health teacher at high school, junior high and high school, and confirmed that that was something that he covered in his classes. And so we then pitched it to the district that way. So that was a way to kind of piggyback on some of the curriculum that they're already using, and link it to research. In fact, he was very open. It didn't turn out to be something we could do, but he, as a teacher, was open to allowing the survey that we were going to do to be part of class time because he thought it was so intertwined with their topics. So some initial goals when you're starting your partnership. Like at the end of the first year of working with a school district, what do you want to look back on and say, this is what we've accomplished? Well, if you've got a foot in the door, if you can get a call back from someone at the school the same day, that's a good marker that you have perhaps a working alliance, something that probably could not have happened before the year ended. One of the most important outcomes is that nobody complained. There wasn't a lot of there weren't complaints from teachers or parents. That's sort of the highest mark you can meet. Okay, I know it sounds odd, but the person who I mentioned earlier, who almost stopped our IES grant project, I've been working with her now for 6 years, and that is always what she points to as the crowning achievement of our work at any given point, is that nobody complained. And it's and if you're not in the schools, you can't appreciate that. But I'm telling you, they're fire people. They're putting out fires all the time. I would encourage you to try to over deliver, minimize the problems, provide a summary of results, offer in services. We routinely will drop off muffins or tea or coffee mugs to our points of contact at the schools, which probably include the counselor and the front office staff. So these are some important goals to over deliver, nobody complains, working alliance, a foot in the door.
University, like if your university has a good sports team, they love the university sweatshirts, t-shirts.
Yeah.
So like any good relationship, you don't want to take your partner for granted, and think about what you can give to your school partner. Sometimes this as I mentioned, the trauma-informed information is just perfect for right now. And as I said, we have a model at the end of the presentation of resources that folks have put together. You want most of your interactions with your partner to be positive. I would argue all of them, right? 100% of your interactions to be positive. And sometimes you can provide things for the schools that you're not even aware that that sort of come up. So I'll give an example that we worked with this one school district in Chicago in a very low income neighborhood south of the city. And I was on Capitol Hill because I engage in legislative advocacy on behalf of IES funding, by the way, for evidence-based interventions. And I was in a representative's office, someone from Illinois, meeting with a staff member, and that person said, you know what, we have these grants that are if they're shovel ready, that's that lingo they use, we can provide to school districts. So if you know anybody, we'll work with them and help them get the grant written and submitted. And I happen to know these people in the school district in that representatives district, so I was able to connect the two of them. I don't even know if they ended up writing the grant or submitting it, but the school district person was so grateful that I was helping to facilitate this relationship that could be long lasting between the representative, Robin Kelly, and her particular district and the school in that district. So those little things you don't think, you might think, what can I give? What can I offer? It can be serendipitous. Things can pop up. There's usually one point of contact that you'll be assigned to work with in the schools. It's often, you might be a school psychologist, counselor, special education case manager, or what have you, depending on your work. Sometimes it's an assistant principal, but you want to communicate with that point of contact, right? You want to respect that you've been allotted this point of communication with the school, and you want to respect that and stick with that for sure.
Yeah, and kind of related to that, if you're involving teachers in some way, in most of the projects we've done, we usually don't have direct contact with teachers. It's usually through the point of contact. I don't know if that's the same for you, Betsy.
Yeah, teachers are teaching, so so they're not usually the people that you talk with, but someone else has a little bit of an administrative duty, possibly. So in how to communicate with this person, it kind of goes back to the points that Tim was making, whether it's a phone call or an email. You want to be as respectful of their time as you can and keep it brief and keep it user-friendly kinds of language.
Okay.
Well, I'm good.
Move on.
Looking through that one.
Oh, okay.
On to the next one. Yeah. So I guess we're next slide.
Okay.
So these are some of the goals I think you should keep in mind of your project, and we all think of our projects as being the most important things to everyone in the world, but they're not necessarily to the school partners that you have. You want to make sure you're asking as little as possible of them with regard to time and energy and so on. A lot of, as I mentioned earlier, schools are sites for a lot of intervention research of all different kinds, some of it mandated. And so even though you could have an evidence-based intervention you can provide access to, they might not have time to use it as part of the school day. So you want to ask as little as possible of them, use as little, if zero, instructional time. You want to use as little of the space in the school as possible. And make sure that your research activities are not controversial. We've already talked a little bit about that. And that teachers and school administrators see the value of the study. What are they going to get out of it? Sometimes, we might provide a report at the end of a project of what we found. So even though I'm going to publish the results and it's going to be completely blind identities of the district and the school and so on, you might want to find out what we found about your particular schools. And that can be a real benefit to administrators. If you're doing a school climate study, they might want to know, well, what did you find out about our school climate? And it's between us, right? It's not going out to all audiences. So that can be a value that they would see in the study. And that schools feel part of the working partnership. Sometimes I've worked with folks who will go into like teacher and staff meetings to introduce their research and perhaps also provide some training, that would be beneficial to them. That can enhance that working partnership, and gives teachers and other staff members an opportunity to ask questions about your research and to learn more. And then keep them updated on the project and provide incentives. We all work incentives into our grants. And so what kinds of incentives might be there? One incentive you might not necessarily think about if you can work this into your budget is, we did this in our prior project, is to allocate money so that principals can hire substitutes. So if you're asking teachers to do work that's part of your project that might take them out of the classroom, then where's the money to hire somebody to come in and cover the class during that time? We found that to be a very, very effective incentive for the school to participate. We're asking them something of their teacher leaders. We can pay to relieve their time.
That's a great idea. I love that.
Yeah, it really works because they don't always have that extra cash lying around.
Can you comment, Betsy, on what kind of dollars we're talking about
Oh
typically?
gosh, I'd have to look like off the top of my head. I don't remember. Um,
Okay.
but because these are substitutes that they're only coming in, for brief periods, like not the whole day.
Mm,
So it usually ends up working out in terms of like, you know, one person's salary, but sort of cut up in various ways. And
sure, sure. Yeah. I know my students always hear from me when you make sure that our manuscripts have acknowledged the school, the support and partnership with the school, and we routinely provide our points of contact with copies of our manuscripts, and where they can see that they're acknowledged in there.
yeah, they can be co-authors sometimes too.
Ah, yeah. Okay, so a little bit about recruiting participants and obtaining consent. This is, again, how to do this work in the schools. Um, I'm very reluctant to outsource the recruitment of student participants or even teacher participants in research. You can't always um, rely on all school staff being as invested as you would like them to be. And it's not unusual to use a process where teachers are may have a role in facilitating or encouraging students to have consent forms returned. Some teachers can get very much behind that, and others not so much. And so, if you could be the spokesperson for the research study yourself, rather than outsourcing it to the teacher or school counselor, I think it's usually best to do that if you can directly engage the students somehow. Now, we've done that in person. We'll do sort of a blitz visit to a school, 3 or 4, 5 people, hit a bunch of classrooms, do a very brief pitch, leave the consent forms for the teacher, and these are often placed in children's backpacks, and they, if you want to use the paper form. And I want to show you this a bit of this video. This is a different way to do it, where if you want to standardize the pitch, you create a video recruitment, and that way everyone's getting the same pitch. Let's see if this works. Basically, these are this first one. Just make a note of yourself. Is one that we had a little bit of technical help, so it looks a little bit more polished, but it's very specific and descriptive to these elementary school students of what we're asking them to do with the consent forms. And it's basically acted out. And there's one of my research colleagues, her daughter played the role of a student, and she's receiving the consent form and putting it into her backpack. And then the other one, the one below that, and this is a pitch that my graduate students made. I play a cameo role in it. And this is more homespun, and it's very brief, but it's very good. And again, this is for high schoolers, so we're not acting out so much what has to happen, but we're making it very explicit, encouraging them to participate. And for this one, we actually were in the classrooms when this was shown, but for the previous one, we weren't in these classrooms. It was, I don't know how many different, 70 classrooms. And so it was just distributed to each teacher, who then showed the video to all their students. It was a very efficient way to do some recruiting. We've had success incentivizing the return of consent forms, regardless of parents' decision, and that's of course important. You don't want to coerce someone into consenting, but we are allowed, at least with our RV, to incentivize the returning of the consent forms. We've had intermittent luck with the use of passive consent, which is where the burden is on the parent or the caregiver to say to the researcher, I want to opt out. I don't want my child to be in this study. But there are some school districts and some IRBs that are more open to that. I just want to show you some stats from one study that were very successful at recruiting and retention, but they used a combination of passive consent, which is a great advantage. They met all the teachers, so there was an opportunity to bolster teacher investment. and there were incentives for students returning forms. And we would all love to have these kinds of recruitment and retention rates.
So I want to touch on in this how to do research in school slide on the notion of making sure that your research team, members of your research team, are culturally responsive, right, to the needs of the children and youth and teachers and principals and so on in the school, particularly the kids, so that you have, on your members of your team who speak Spanish, if it's a predominantly Spanish speaking population of students who are from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds themselves. That can be really, really important for going into the schools in particular communities. There are a variety of ways of delivering your measures, of course, some online, some face-to-face. I think, as we all know, these online response rates can be pretty low, and I think especially sometimes for parents, for teachers. So I think take that into consideration if it's a way that you can distribute measures that people complete at a teacher, faculty, staff meeting, if you can have access to parents perhaps over the phone or whatever to have them complete the measures. If it's not online, you're more likely to get a higher response rate. At least that's been our experience. It's easy to ignore those emails. And then unobtrusive direct observation methods are really critical, right? You cannot interrupt instructional time. That's just the golden rule. This is me, 19. So yeah, next one. So continuing to move to bigger projects and longer studies, you're continuing to leverage and build in that relationship and partnership and thinking about what I can do for you, recognizing that there can be turnover in schools from year to year and that you might not always be dealing with the same professionals that you were dealing with the year before. And that's particularly the case oftentimes in urban schools, for instance. And that's so important. Making sure that there are tangible benefits from your research and from the partnership. Think of it that way. It may not be directly from the research that you're doing that provides a tangible benefit, but the partnership is what provides the tangible benefit. It provides professionals in the school with access to community mental health resources, for example. It provides them with grant money so that they can offer stipends or pay for substitutes or give resources to the schools in the form of curricular materials and other things. I think we're on to the next one.
I just want to comment, if I may, that in terms of service, I do research on school-based mentoring for kids who are being bullied. And there are some semesters where we're not collecting research data, but we continue to provide mentoring, in part because it's a service learning course for our college students, but also just to maintain the infrastructure of the mentoring program, and also to continue to provide the service to the school. So we're not simply pulling from them, we're always providing for them. I'm sorry, I think there's a lawnmower outside my window. All right.
Go ahead.
Good. Go ahead. You want to do this one, Betsy? Since I got this long. Okay. So I like to encourage and try to prepare my graduate students for doing this kind of work. Some of whom are on this in this presentation. So they're very much involved in planning and conducting in-school data collection, and some of them perhaps can comment on that later. But and we've learned a lot. Sometimes students have big ideas and assessment protocols that are way too ambitious, and they learn to adjust. So it's definitely a laboratory for them when they're out trying to plan and collect data themselves. They manage a lot of the routine communication with points of contact. I try, if we can, to bring graduate students along when we interact with staff. I know my students have done some of that. And a lot of my students write NRSA proposals that involve research school partnerships. So they're having to seek those letters of support which is a great exercise, a great training opportunity as well. So these are a few resources that provide a lot of similar overlapping information to what we provided today. And then, Betsy, you want to speak about these?
Yeah, real quickly, these are some of the resources that have emerged during the COVID-19 crisis, prepared by folks at various organizations and universities for school professionals, just as models for the kind of work that you could do, along with that link to IES.
Anything else, Dr. Talbott, before we end today?
I think so. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope it's been useful to you, and please provide us feedback in the survey.
That was fun. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Take care.